that are released into the atmosphere by such things as air conditioners in cars and homes. While people throughout the world are now trying to restrict the use of CFCs, it may already be too late to help some species of frogs.
Along the coast of California, between Los Angeles and San Francisco, sea otters frolic in the water. Unlike whales, seals, and other marine mammals, sea otters don't have a layer of blubber to insulate them against the cold ocean water. They eat constantly to burn enough fuel inside their bodies to keep warm. When they feed, they lie on their backs and use their stomachs as a kind of plate. Sea otters are a keystone species. A keystone species is a species whose presence or absence has a great impact on the surrounding environment. Sea otters' main food are clams and sea urchins. Sea urchins, in turn, eat kelp, a kind of seaweed. Dozens of different kinds of fish, as well as sea stars, snails, octopuses, and squid, live among the kelp and depend upon it for food. Sea otters play a key role in protecting kelp because they eat sea urchins, whose voracious appetite for kelp would otherwise destroy these underwater forests. Without sea otters to control the population of sea urchins, the kelp beds would soon disappear. This almost happened along much of the California coast. Sea otters had been hunted for their dense fur. By the early 1900s, people thought that all the otters had been slaughtered. However, a small colony of survivors was discovered in 1937 off the coast of Monterey. With protection, sea otters have been making a comeback. This is good, not only for the sea otters, but for all marine life that depend upon the kelp beds the otters protect.
In British Columbia, Canada, the world's largest salmon fleet sets out on its annual job. A record catch awaits them this year, far ahead of last, helping to ease world food shortages. Nets 1/3 of a mile long are dropped around a big school of salmon, and the hauling in begins. The season lasts only a few weeks, but it's good fishing indeed.
This is how the oceans seemed to us 50 or so years ago. People thought fish were a limitless source of food for the world's population. We only had to catch them more efficiently. Not anymore. Salmon are now scarce off the Pacific coasts of Canada and Alaska. And the problem is not limited to salmon or to this area of the world's oceans. Worldwide, many species of fish are becoming hard to find. Off the Atlantic coast of New England, for example, cod and other fish that once were plentiful now are scarce. The main cause of this situation is that we have caught fish at a faster rate than they can reproduce in the oceans. Part of the problem is that the demand for fish has increased as the human population has grown. Fish provide 1/6 of the animal protein that people eat. Another problem is that in the past, our government encouraged fishermen to expand their fleets and to build bigger boats. While the number and size of boats increased, the number of fish did not. More boats were trying to catch fewer fish. The result is that many kinds of fish are severely reduced in number. The only way to save them is to strictly limit fishing until these species have had time to reproduce and replenish their numbers. In the meantime, thousands of fishermen and others who depend on the fishing industry are out of work.
Elephants are among the most intelligent and social animals. They live in close family units headed by the oldest female. Older elephants pass on their accumulated knowledge to younger ones, teaching them, for example, where to find water, or, based on their own experience, whether to fear humans. 100 years ago, there may have been over 20 million elephants throughout much of Africa. By 1990, this number was reduced to 600,000 or less. As elsewhere, much of the problem has been pressure from a growing human population. Cities, towns, and farms have taken over much of the land, reducing places for elephants to live. Elephants have long faced other perils. They have been prized as trophies for big game hunters. And elephants have been killed for their ivory tusks. Ivory has long been valued because its unusual composition makes it possible to cut it up, carve it, and polish it. Over the course of centuries, a thriving trade in ivory developed. Today, most of Africa's elephants now live in protected reserves in parks, like this one in Kenya. But even here, the elephants are not safe. Poachers sneak into these parks and kill elephants for their tusks. Fortunately, many countries have signed agreements banning the sale of ivory, and the ivory trade has become less profitable. If the ban is enforced, there is at least a chance that these unusual beasts will survive.
Coastal redwoods are majestic plants. They can grow over 300 feet tall as a 10-story building. They can live for more than 2,000 years. Today in California, there are redwoods that were alive when the Roman Empire was at its height. Redwood trees existed over 200 million years ago. There were redwood trees when dinosaurs dominated life on Earth. At one time, redwoods covered millions of acres along the California coast. Beginning in the last century, redwood trees were logged for their valuable timber. Before the age of chainsaws, it took 2 men 11 days to cut down a single tree. At this rate, there didn't seem much of a threat. But logging became more efficient, and the demand for redwood timber grew. Redwood is used to build houses, fences, and decks. It is a high-quality wood that is both beautiful and long-lasting. Today, 95% of the original redwood forests have been cut down. Large areas were clear-cut, meaning that all the trees were logged at one time. Timber companies have replanted many of the areas that were cut. But these second-growth forests don't have the same diversity of species that the original old-growth forests have. Old-growth redwood forests that have never been cut are complex ecosystems where animals, plants, fungi, and other living things interact and depend on each other. For example, the marbled murrelet, a seabird, nests only in old-growth forests. There are only a couple of thousand of these birds left. The spotted owl is another species that depends on old-growth forests. At the same time, there are thousands of people who depend upon the timber industry for their jobs, including lumberjacks, truck drivers, and people who work in the mills. However, some argue that at the rate we are now cutting down our forests, we risk losing them altogether. And without the trees, there won't be any jobs. One answer to this conflict between jobs and protecting the biodiversity of the